Coming at you live from the Lucas Mather Studios in Orange County. We are talking God, Guns, in America. Look at that. See if I can answer this. What's up, dude? How you doing? Okay, I'm live. I'm live right now. So, okay, man. Bye. I'm having a guest to talk about this book. We went to grad school, the same place that the author of this book did. And this is a Christian Democrat. I'm going to go ahead and tag my friend here if I can find him. Happy St. Patrick's Day, by the way. As you know, St. Patrick was instrumental in abolishing slavery in Ireland. So goes the legend. And so I'm having some... looks like he's coming on right now. Kurtis is coming on. But I'm having some Irish whiskey, and this glass and the cold stones are courtesy of Dr. Paul Potter. Thank you, sir. And there's Kurtis.
Howdy, guys.
Hey, guys. This is Kurtis. Kurtis, you're live from somewhere in America, right?
Yeah, I'm in Fayetteville this evening.
It's technically America, right?
It is. It's Middle America.
Okay. So you get to be an authority on God, Guns, in America then. Let me see if I can switch this around here. To me.
Hey, there you are.
So, do you have a cigar? First of all, first order of business. What do you?
Right?
What is it tonight?
Tonight I am smoking the Ruination. It's I think it's a 54 gauge.
Kurtis, do you have a some kind of device for your voice to amplify your voice? Do you have do you have a microphone?
I don't have that with me.
Okay.
Am I difficult to hear?
Yeah, I can barely hear you, and I just don't know what the final product will be.
Dang.
Do you have one accessible?
Yeah, I would need a few minutes to get to it.
Okay, go get it, because it will be worth it to have it, I think.
Okay.
Because it's a big difference from what I remember.
Okay. I'll be right back.
Okay. Just stay live, man. Stay live. Stay live, man.
Oh.
That way we don't have to worry about technical difficulties later on.
Okay.
I will just do a brief overview of the book for everybody. So Kurtis is going to go get his microphone, and that way we can hear him better. And I'm going to go through this book, God, Guns, in America, by Mike Austin. This book is actually, is there a way you can mute yours? No? Okay. Maybe I should just stop and start again. That's all right. That's all right. We'll continue. How far out do you think you are? Okay. This book is a Democrat book. It's a book that attempts to take the Democratic Party line on self-defense with a firearm and couch it in religious language, the language of Christianity. So there's no separation of church and state in this book. This is what would the moral tradition in the Christian religion, as he understands it, say about the contemporary debates about self-defense with a firearm that we have right now in our country. And we're going to do a multi-part series on this. We've divided our work up. Kurtis is traveling, so it's a little bit rough getting him on right now, but we're going to do it because the devil's not going to win on this one. There are some interesting parts of the book. It's not all bad, but I'm just going to tell you my critique of it up front before we get into the details. My critique is that the book is inured, that its soul is inured to the harm of criminalizing innocent conduct. That's the nuts and bolts of it right there. It is not sufficiently attuned to the horror of allowing the government the right to call innocent conduct criminal. Let's take a broad view before Kurtis gets on of self-defense. There has always been some kind of weapon that you could use for self-defense in human history. And the technology for those weapons, the need for those weapons has always been there. That is not anything new. From the very first murder, Cain and Abel, remember Cain and Abel in the Bible. If Abel would have seen Cain coming, does anybody think that he would not have had a right to self-defense and would not have had a right to anticipate it with a weapon of some kind? I mean, that's a real question I'm asking. When I think of that question, I don't have any problem whatsoever thinking that Abel should be able to defend himself with an effective weapon against Cain. And that goes for the story of aggression and immoral, criminal, violent activity against people. Weapons have been very useful in self-defense. And in this country, there's always been firearms. And it's been legal and righteous to defend yourself against that violence, that immoral violence, with an effective weapon like a firearm. And it's been relatively recently that national efforts especially have come to the fore to curb that and to grow the administrative state in order to curb that. You have to grow the government in order to curb the right to self-defense, to criminalize it, because that's really what we're talking about. I'm going to show you the table of contents here and give you a sense of what you can look at if you look at the book. So here we go. All right, we got this chapter right here, More Than Thoughts and Prayers. That's the legislative agenda. And we're not going to get to that today, but this is who's who of Democrat ideas in this book. But he starts, of course, with what he takes to be a history of guns in America and the right to own a gun. And so we're going to focus on these two chapters today. And we're going to key in especially on the right to what he calls the right to own a gun. Now, we're not going to get there too quickly because Kurtis is kind of integral to this project. And I'm going to wait for Kurtis to get on. Anybody have any questions or thoughts or comments? Happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm very patient, by the way, so you can take as long as you want to ask your question. I'm not going anywhere, at least not yet. There you are.
Finally.
Glad you're able to find a place.
Yeah, me too. I hope that wasn't too much of a pain. Sorry about that. I hate to keep people waiting like that. It's a little more challenging when we're traveling.
Mm-hmm.
So is the audio better? It's coming through?
Yeah.
Excellent. Good.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
I just went through the table of contents.
Okay, very good.
I said where the legislative agenda was, the wet dream of the Democratic Party agenda, that he bathes in, he baptizes in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Right.
I said no separation of church and state for this guy.
Yeah, the whole separation of church and state thing is another piece of this to address. Yeah. But
yeah. Well, that's a First Amendment thing.
That's right.
We're on the Second Amendment, although he thinks that there's an analogy between the First and the Second Amendment. That's one of the problems we're going to get to.
Right.
Problems with the book. But yeah, I was just inviting people to ask questions, and I said, I'm very patient. I'll take as long as you want to ask questions. You know.
Yeah.
Just.
This is a topic that's really important.
Yeah.
You know, and there's
that's
not
right.
a lot of people think carefully about these things, and so it's good to ask the questions.
Sure. And you know, to his credit, to Mike Austin's credit, I don't know him. He friended me and then defriended me once he found out I was a Republican. That gives you an idea of his character.
Well, I can't really say
I wasn't that impressed.
I can't really say that I know him either, although we were in undergrad together. We've had some discussions a long time ago, and to be fair, I couldn't even recall what they were.
Yeah.
But, you know, I know him to be a great guy. I know he has a good heart. He has a good mind, and he wants things, you know, done well. But this is a complicated topic that crosses so many disciplines, really. I mean,
Sure.
It's a monumental project to try to undertake. So, I mean, I commend him for trying, you know, giving it that.
I do too, and I did that in print. I commended him in print.
Yeah.
For that specific thing. When I responded to the book in print. Mm-hmm. I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to use the stuff that he's done for Psychology Today, because he writes for Psychology Today. Mm-hmm. He does stuff on like fallacies and stuff like that, and I think he talks about guns in his basic classes that he teaches. I can spot this a mile away because I teach those basic classes, and I know that's probably what I would do. he probably uses this as a controversial issue, and he's noticed a lot of, he's teaching in Kentucky, and he's probably frustrated with his students that are Republicans, and he thought, okay, I can't handle it anymore. I'm going to write this book. And so, I think that's where he's coming from, is he's got some stuff to share about fallacies, and he wants to elevate. I think what he's trying to do is to elevate the discourse on a popular level, not so much with scholars, but with popular level.
Yes.
This is probably a popular level book, I would say. Although he probably would use it in his classes, right?
Right.
But I think that's where he's coming from. But it's hard to say, because I invited him to come on and be interviewed 7 months ago. And he did get back with me, and he said he was too busy. And so I offered to have a dialogue with him, and he turned me down, which I wasn't that surprised about after he defriended me. It was about the same time. And he was also involved with an effort to censor me on Biolan's Doing Philosophy.
I remember
And
that.
I documented that when it happened. It's on Facebook Live. I documented it. I think it's around June or something on my public page. So that's there. That's still up there. They can't censor that. I mean, they would probably love to, but there's some weird things with Biolan's Doing Philosophy, I think. There's a Democrat influence there that then, by the way, they hate it when you call it what it is, but it is Democrat. And that's my field, American politics, and so I like to just call it what it is. I mean, if it was naturalists and materialists censoring dualists, there's nothing wrong with saying that out loud. That's
Right.
what's happening. And that's exactly what has happened in the past in philosophy departments. We all know that.
Right.
The same thing is happening here. It's just Republican versus Democrat.
Right. And I think also along those lines, I think it seems to me that Democrats and Republicans tend to fall in the camps of Democrat being, we can eradicate these evils, we can get rid of all of this stuff, or if we can't get rid of it, we can make it so minute.
What evils are you talking about?
You name it. I mean, whatever evil it is. You know what I mean? Like whatever's bad out there that we don't like, we can control it. We can get rid of it. We can legislate it. We can, if we want people to be moral, we can make them moral. If we want if we want a certain set of conditions to come about, we can make that happen. And on the other side, and I don't know that it's fair to say that it's all Democrats and all Republicans. It could, you could have people thinking this way in both camps, but I just think
I never say I never say that. I never say all.
Right.
It's in the same way you talk about if you were studying animals in the Serengeti. I mean, there's going to be a zebra that doesn't have stripes.
Right. It's just a poor syllogism.
It doesn't mean that zebras don't have stripes.
Yeah.
Generally speaking.
But on the other side,
doesn't mean you can't study this stuff. Yeah.
On the other side, you've got people who realize that there are going to, no matter what we do, there are going to be undesirable situations that are going to exist. I mean, Jesus
I think
I
think we need to tighten that down a little bit, just for the book, for the sake of the book. We're talking about murder. We are talking about preventing murder. Let's just say what it is: assault with a deadly weapon. We are talking about immoral violence.
Right.
That's what they say they want to prevent, right? Right? I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Let's get into the book.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Let's get into it. It's good.
Let's get into the book. As I don't want to sit here and bloviate too much. People are going to watch this later because we're doing a multi-part series. I mentioned that.
Oh, good.
So I said we were only going to do chapter 1 and 2 today, and we might not even get done with chapter 1 and 2, but we will broach this topic. And I've been talking for a while, so I'll let you go with chapter 1 if you want,
Okay.
of God, Guns in America. I know you'd got your cigar. You have somewhere to rest that?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I found a nice little alcove here at the hotel with a
Cool.
bench, so I'm good. Um,
Nice.
you know, I, the things at the beginning. Hang on a second. Let me flip over to it so I know that I'm. Yeah. So at the beginning of it, he gives some uh, anecdotal. Well, not anecdotal. I mean, I guess kind of anecdotal, but he gives some
Mm-hmm.
examples, of some shootings, and with horrific results. I mean, obviously, people died. They laid down their lives to protect people. What he laid out here were some pretty um, courageous happenings, and in some pretty brutal circumstances that maybe have been able to be prevented. Um, it's a matter of how we prevent those things that the book contends with, I guess. Um, but after that, he wants to go in and give an overview of the Great American Gun Debate. Brief history. He gives a brief history of guns in America, and this is all well and good. But I feel like the history there. I was looking at the the references, the things that he brought up throughout there. His history is a little uh, wanting, I guess. It doesn't go very far back. He deals with was it night? Help me, Lucas, with the gun rights or the Gun Protection Act, and then was it the 30s?
The National Firearms Act?
National Firearms Act, yeah. So that's he goes back that far, um, and then talks about the other the registry, and then he talks about the Brady Act, and all this. But there's so much more, it seemed to me, in the history of guns in America. Um, he talks about how it's difficult to, when he gets into the Second Amendment part there, he talks about how it's difficult to interpret because of the phrases. And I kind of found it interesting that he pointed out that I want to say it was in this that he pointed out uh, punctuation hadn't even come about until long after the Second Amendment was written, and yet he gave some. It seemed like he wanted to parse it out accordingly with punctuation, and I don't know. It seemed like it confused it. He's looking at it one way, um, trying to explain that this is all about militias and what militias are, and that we have. He cited another gentleman talking about that, and I don't think that is thorough. I think
Okay.
it's slanting.
All right. Let me go back to the very first paragraph of God, Guns in America. I'm going to be analytic here, and I'm going to just point out the very first thing I notice. The very first thing I notice is he uses the term gun violence.
Yes.
And I think that is very interesting. As soon as I saw that,
It's
I
telling.
knew where he was going. Uh, he uses the word gunman always for the bad person, always for a bad person.
Right.
He uses the term shootings. And then in the paragraph 3, he finally says these terrible crimes. But I still haven't heard what the crime is. Let's go back to Exodus 20, because we're talking about God, guns, in America, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exodus 20 is the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not murder. That's the command
Wait, it
from
doesn't
God.
say it's not kill?
It says, thou shalt not murder.
Oh.
You have a right not to be murdered. Okay? That the term gun violence is, if gun violence is the problem, well then self-defense with a gun, which is violent, would be part of the problem. I I already see this. The writing is on the wall. That will be part of the problem. But what if the problem is murder and attempted murder?
Right.
Well, then self-defense with a firearm, even if it's violent, because sometimes self-defense is violent. Just go to any Brazilian jiu-jitsu dojo and you'll see it's violent, right? You know, any self-defense training is violent. You know, uh,
Absolutely.
that's just what it is. That's the nature of the thing.
Well, and a violent
Every
assault
every
requires a violent response.
every time a gun goes off, it's violent, even when it's legal and moral.
That's right.
If you go to the shooting range, you can always tell the people that are not used to being at the shooting range. I mean, it's their first time or whatever. They're jolting, you know, every time. Boom, boom, you know, boom. It's violent. The term gun violence does not distinguish between that perfectly moral violence and immoral violence. It incorporates both kinds, and he thinks both are a problem. And finally, he says, these terrible crimes. I wish that he would have said what the crime was, because when you use the term gunman, well, someone with a gun is a gunman, right? I mean,
Right.
that's what it is,
A
right?
good guy with a
But
gun and a bad guy with a gun.
policemen have guns.
They're gunmen.
Uh, by the way, isn't that sexist? But, you know, I guess we're not worried about. We're at the level of Democratic Party where we don't need to worry about that. As long as we're going to ban guns and hurt innocent people, we can get away with these terms. But that's the first thing I notice
Yeah.
is he's insensitive to the criminalization of self-defense, and he includes it apparently in gun violence.
Well, and you pointed out another interesting thing. You said we have the right not to be murdered.
Yeah.
And that what that is something, a really important thing, I think,
Yes.
pertaining to rights that
Yeah.
doesn't even get addressed in the book at all. It
Mhm.
is
Okay.
from what I've
You
seen.
want to go there? You want to go to the chapter
Well,
2?
we don't necessarily need to go there. I just want to point out that
You went there. You went
well,
there. Let's go there. We can go back. We can go
yeah,
back.
okay.
I mean, we're in charge of this thing.
I just want to point out he didn't address positive or negative rights, and
Mhm.
I don't feel like this. He gave a small section on rights, and it's in chapter 2, and he didn't give a thorough enough exposition of rights, the nature of rights. He doesn't talk about the whole nature of them, and it's just
Well,
too
where does he
it's just too
for
cursory.
everybody else they do not see what you see. So where he ends up is he makes a distinction between legal right and moral right,
Mm-hmm.
the natural law, the positive law, and this odd distinction between absolute right and conditional right, which I think he does a lot of work for him. Absolute right versus conditional right. But what you're saying is he left out positive versus negative rights.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
now why is link that with the right not to be murdered?
Well, because see, I would say that negative rights are rights that are absolute. Um,
Well, make sure you refer to the negative and positive part. Then what's different between
it,
negative rights and
right. So if negative rights are absolute, if they're grounded in natural law, they're things that
well, don't
can't be
let's not talk about
left.
let's not talk about
But
absolute.
if, on the
That's
other
a different
hand,
topic.
well,
That's
I
yeah.
actually think the way negative rights are grounded, they're grounded in the natural
But
law.
let's say what they are first. We got to say what they are first. What is a negative right?
A negative right is something you have the right to not have happen to you. Discrimination. You have a right to not be let's say, well, discrimination's a little, you have
Go
a
with
right.
go with the Ten Commandments, man. Go with the Ten Commandments. That's in the Bible. We discriminate all the time. I
Right.
discriminated against a
Yeah,
lot of people when I
discrimination.
got married.
Yeah, yeah.
When I got married, I discriminated against, and guess what? If I hadn't, my wife would have been really upset with
Mm, amen.
me.
Amen.
Let's. I mean, what I'm saying, this is actually a lot simpler, I think, than he makes it. And this is one of the things that I think you and I agree with on this is that he um, he ignores how simple the Christian message is, the gospel.
Mm,
I think he ignores.
yeah.
You have a right not to be murdered. He never mentions that. He mentions the right to life, but as you know,
But that's a
but I
that's not a negative
go,
right. That's a positive
yeah.
right.
What it was. See, that's an
Do,
that's good.
yeah.
What is it? What's the right to life?
Do we have a right not to die?
Right. Very
We might
good.
have a
Very
right
good.
to
Very good.
life, but that's a
Very good.
positive right if we have a right to life,
There. Yeah. 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 There you go.
right?
Yeah. There you
So,
go. Right. 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 Do I have a right to have people provide me with food to stay alive? What
some
about the government? Do I
some
have a
people would
right for
say
the
that.
do I have a right for health care? Do I have a right to health care?
Yeah, this is a far-reaching understanding.
You know, it's interesting because the typical Democrat thinks that I have a right, you should have a right for the government to give you money and give you health care.
That's right.
Those are positive rights, right?
Yeah.
But um, that's kind of foreign to the Christian tradition, I think. I mean, it's not really clear in the Ten Commandments, for example. That's a baseline I start with is the Ten Commandments.
Hmm.
I have a right not to be a victim of stealing.
Right.
I have a right to private property. That would be pretty clear.
Yeah.
But do I have a right to? He says you have a right to own a gun. Do I have a right to have the government give me a gun?
Yeah. Yeah. What does it
He
mean to
never
have a
went
right?
there.
What
He
does it mean to
never
have
went
a
there.
right to own a gun? Where does the right come
I
from?
know. Well,
Exactly.
if I have a right to own a gun, then don't I wait, don't I get the government to pay for that for me? I mean, we're Democrats, right?
Right. They pay
I
for
have, I have a
everything
right.
for us.
I have a right to a gun. Where is it? Give it to me. But he's parasitic on that whole tradition
Hmm.
of of
It sure seems that way.
common sense. Yeah, and I think he adds to it sloppily. I think, but
Well, and I think some of the
th-
some of the conclusions some of the places he goes, some of the conclusions that he makes, some of the things that go throughout the book that he's trying to address, some of the topics he's trying to address would be made more clear even for him if he had a better, thorough understanding of rights.
well, you have a right not to be murdered. That's pretty clear. He never mentions that right in the book. He
Correct.
never mentions it. And I think the reason he doesn't mention it is because I think it would go a long way in undermining his legislative agenda, I think. But
Yeah.
it's so clear. You have a right. Look, I'm defending myself against murder, right? That's paradigmatic innocent conduct. It in fact has been criminalized in Democrat jurisdictions. In some jurisdictions, it's only legalized because Republicans have gotten in there. Witness Wren versus District of Columbia in 2017. Not that he's aware of that decision. Okay, well, we're
Well,
giving a
I
kind of
want
an
to.
overview here.
Well, let me point something out too. That here it's in this
Sure.
section on the right, in the chapter 2, where he says on page 25, kind of the middle of that last paragraph, even the right to self-defense is not absolute. But what does that mean?
It is,
You know,
is my right not to be murdered absolute?
I mean,
He never poses the question, let alone answers it. He never poses the question.
yeah,
And when I read the Bible, I don't see conditions on my right not to be murdered.
right.
Okay, so that's an interesting thing. So where you're on page 25, right?
Yeah, that was on page 25.
How do you spell 25? Hold on.
Oh, that's too much.
Let's look at define a conditional right. A right that can be forfeited. I mean, you can tell he's chomping at the bit, man. He loves this. He's wanting this. He's wanting the right to bear arms to be in this category right here.
Yes,
Which this is not
absolutely.
this is not a distinction I'm interested in. I'm not really that interested in it. But since he brought it up, fine. But conditional right, a right that can be forfeited when one fails to demonstrate the relevant abilities for responsibly exercising it.
Yeah.
Well, okay. It seems like to self-defense would not be uh, conditioned on my abilities. That sounds like a really odd thing to say. Um, my right to not be murdered is not conditioned on my abilities. It seems like that would be, he would have to say that would be an absolute right that I would have, not to be murdered.
Now your ability to prevent yourself from being murdered, that now we're talking about something that might be conditioned.
Well, that sounds a little bit odd that that my right to be free from murder would be conditioned on some abilities that I would have. It seems like I would have that absolutely.
Right. You either have it or you don't.
But it seems like I would also have the right not to have innocent conduct criminalized. Absolutely. Why would that be
Absolutely.
conditional on my abilities? I don't know why no, the actor in criminalizing self-defense, in criminalizing innocent conduct, is the government. He spends very little time critically analyzing government activity in regulating firearms. Very, 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 very short shrift in describing the full status quo of the regulatory state as it pertains to firearms and criminalizing self-defense with a firearm. He's not interested in that. He's not
No.
interested in listing out what's already the case in terms of criminalizing innocent conduct. So, for example, he mentions this. It's getting a little bit dark here now all of a sudden, and not that there's anything wrong with being dark.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Don't want to be misinterpreted there.
I want to make sure that we are clear about that in terms of right and wrong. Nothing wrong with being dark. Um, but excuse me. Did you guys hear that? Did you hear the little, excuse me.
You snuck it in there. It's all right. How's that cigar?
It's racist. It's racist because it keeps going out on me. Okay. So he mentions the murders that happened in 2015 at an Oregon community college. Do you remember where he mentions that? I can't recall exactly. It's getting dark enough where I can't see my notes exactly. But let's see here. I should have brought that, but he I don't know if when I find it, I'm not sure it's going to be helpful for me to look at. We started a bit late, and I was trying to
My
get some
apologies.
light.
Yeah,
That's okay. It's okay. We're doing what we can, right?
that's right.
I'm just trying to explain why I can't shine it. But anyway, he mentions these murders, and I remember being on campus teaching political philosophy when those murders happened. And I got an NEA mailer. And NEA is the National Education Association. It's totally Democrat, pure Democrat, radical, far left Democrat. And in this mailer, they were calling for the kind of legislative proposals that he's talking about here, poo-pooing self-defense, and that in that mailer they suggested that we fight back only as a last resort with staplers.
Insane.
Staplers.
Insane.
Staplers. 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 This is the party that thinks they're pro-science, by the way. So much for the science of self-defense. I'm trained by Navy SEALs in small arms, and they want me to use staplers.
Right.
So if I were to have a small pistol on me and use that for self-defense, effectively preventing murder on campus, I would be criminal.
Yeah.
I would be.
That's insane.
That is not biblical. That's not in the Bible. Defending yourself against murder is not criminal activity. It's paradigmatic innocent conduct. Of course, if you criminalize it, then you have to grow the administrative state, the apparatus of this administrative. You have to fund it with tax money, and you have to get in there, and you have to give it buildings and government sedans and put the lights on and get people cell phones. You're hauling in tax money into this vortex of criminalization of innocent conduct. And he has no problem with that.
And we wonder why we have an overcriminalization problem
Yeah.
in America.
In the context of being, to your point, being suspicious of the power of the police state over matters of life and death, this is his position, and he's baptizing it in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Thinking that this is going to prevent murder. You know what it will prevent? It will mean that I'm stuck with the only lawful self-defense with a stapler in my classroom, even though I'm trained with a firearm.
Yeah, it seems crazy.
It is crazy.
You can't.
It is absolutely.
You
it's immoral. It's not just crazy. It's immoral.
It is.
It's immoral.
It is.
Let's just call it what it is. It's
can't,
not Christian. It's not common sense. It's immoral.
When you have
criminalizing self-defense is immoral.
And when you have somebody coming into schools to do a school shooting, a bad person coming in with guns,
Mm-hmm.
That's an active thing that's happening. You can't deal with that in a passive way unless you are,
It depends on the situation, I
going to
guess.
lay yourself down as a victim. The only way that can be
Well, you
combated
could,
is with
yeah.
activity. Like
Yeah.
the 3 examples that he gave at the beginning of the book. They didn't have guns. So all the only active thing they could do to prevent continued murdering was sacrifice their life. Wouldn't it be considered a better situation if I could prevent those murders without having to sacrifice further life? You're putting
Well,
people in a position to give up another life in order to prevent more other lives from, you know what I'm saying? Like it's a trade-off. These
well,
are trade-offs that aren't being considered.
and and to, I think we're on the same page here, but I want to just double check.
Sure.
You're not just making a practical point, right? You're making a moral point, right?
Absolutely. I'm making both. Yeah.
Okay. Your moral point is what? Your moral point is that that conduct should not be criminal,
Right. There
right?
shouldn't.
Are you, is that what you're
There's.
saying?
I should. If regardless of if somebody comes into a crowded space with a gun, murdering people, there shouldn't be any criminalization happening, regardless of the use of how that person is stopped. That person could, in my opinion, it seems that that person should be able to be stopped with whatever means stops that person, even if that means his own death. And none of those activities should be considered immoral. In fact, those would be moral actions. Stopping
Well,
stopping a murderer is a moral action, even if that means killing him. Because you're
it,
not
it's it,
murdering him, you're killing him, and there's a difference.
it it's innocent conduct, right?
Exactly.
That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Innocent conduct should not be criminal.
There's a difference between killing someone and murdering someone. And the innocence, an
There's
innocent person can kill.
there's a difference between innocent and guilty,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
Now, if you're missing these basic categories of innocent versus guilt, they predate the positive law.
Yes.
They should inform the positive law.
That's right.
What do we mean by positive law? We mean the laws that are passed by legislatures and enforced by executives and upheld by the judicial system.
Yes.
And if you miss this basic structure of innocent versus guilt, you're going to get the whole thing wrong. You're going to be biased toward the government as if the government is just some kind of party that can never be wrong, no matter what it does. It criminalizes self-defense. Oh, okay, that's just what it is. That's fine.
Well, if the
That's
government
fine.
said so.
We're not going to be suspicious of that.
Right. Yeah, the government isn't going to solve our problems.
Well, government does have a role, and I don't disregard that at all.
Sure.
It's perfectly legitimate for government to say murder is illegal.
Mm-hmm.
That's perfectly legitimate. Where we go wrong, where we have a tendency to go wrong, is to build a structure upon that for political purposes, not for moral purposes, but for political purposes, to gain power, for one political party to gain power at the expense of another, to tyrannize a minority, or for a minority to tyrannize the majority, to create structures that criminalize innocent conduct.
Yeah, that's really the meat of this.
That's exactly what the problem is with the book.
Yeah.
It's biased toward the government. It doesn't take a careful look. If this book was fair, it would say, let's take a look at the status quo of government regulation of firearms. And let's not presuppose that it's already okay. Let's take a look at what's going on here exactly. Like, for example, in California, you can get a concealed carry license if the sheriff likes you, because it's a may issue state. And that means that there's incredible discretion by statute in the sheriff as a granting authority of that license to conceal carry in public.
Yeah.
Well, you can get one, and you'll see pictures of me on Facebook rubbing elbows with the Orange County Sheriff because I'm heavily involved in local politics, and we got him in, and he does
He does a bang up
actually,
job.
he does. He issues those permits, and he treats it more fairly than before. I think the most fair system would be a shall issue state, which would be you apply for a permit, and if you meet certain criteria established by law beforehand, you get it. There's no discretion by the agent in charge of that. Just like in the DMV with driver's licenses. There's no discretion with driver's licenses. They don't give you an interview and see if you're a good person.
Right.
Do you have a good reason to have a driver's license? You
Do
don't need a good
car?
reason to get a driver's license. In fact, you pretty much have to have one. You don't need one. Do you need a good reason? You get one just by meeting certain criteria. And in fact, increasingly in California, you get one whether you meet any legal criteria whatsoever. But my thought is on that is that you can get one in California and be legal to carry that weapon all up and down the state. I could take it into San Francisco, the worst of the Democrat areas. Our sheriff here is Republican. Shocker, shocker. Where's my glycerin tablets? But if I step a big toe on a campus, I'm a felon. So I can, and that's part of the lattice structure of regulations that exist. No attention to those kind of things at all. Right. So in other words, I have the let's say I have a concealed carry permit and I have a firearm on me legally in California. And as soon as I'm a model citizen until I step a big toe on campus, which is where I work and which is where these murders are happening that everybody's freaked out about. And there's no bodyguards and there's no security system like at the airport. Anybody could just walk in there. I tell my students, anybody could just walk in here. And it's criminal conduct for me to lawfully or to use that concealed carry permit to walk on campus, just like I would walk into the grocery store or walk into a bank. Yeah. Perfectly lawful for me to walk into a bank with that firearm, but I can't in my classroom, and then that's where the murders are happening. Amazing. And so if I fight back, I'm a criminal. If I prevent murder, I am a criminal. Where is that in the Bible? No attention to that whatsoever anywhere in the book. You could tell I'm angry.
Well, it's upsetting, you know.
It's a righteous anger, though. It's a righteous anger.
What we're doing, what legislation is amounting to here is deciding where we can prevent murder and where we can't. That doesn't make any sense. Like, why can't we just prevent murder?
You would think that you'd want to do that, right? If murder is so bad.
In all places.
What he's really saying, I mean, if you just let that go, let that slide, you're saying that well, there's so much I could say there. I don't believe they want to stop murder. I just don't believe it. I'm just going to say it. I don't believe that. I think they want political power. They want to grow the government. That's what they want.
Yeah.
Because we know how to stop murder. We already know how to do that. If you want to stop murder in your home, are perfectly legal for you to use a firearm to do that. So, by the way, let's talk about the Second Amendment. You know, we haven't even talked about the Second Amendment. We've been going on and on and on about this. We haven't even mentioned the Second Amendment.
Rights
How
and
long
morality.
how long have we been going?
A while.
A while. Okay. Well, let's talk about the Second Amendment. We'll just at least broach it.
Yeah, let's touch on that, and we'll wrap up on the Second Amendment.
Oh, okay. You think that you should be able to talk about the Second Amendment here on the first day?
Well, he says it's very confusing to interpret and understand. He says that in the book.
Okay.
It's highly complicated.
I was in the wrong chapter here. Okay. Where was this? Oh, it was in chapter 1. That's where I might go wrong. Chapter 1, page 9. Okay. He's got the text of it. The text is odd. It's an odd amendment. It's strange. You know. But that's the language they chose. So I'm not going to quibble with it too much. But you know, he quotes the Second Amendment, and he says it says a well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary. It's not optional, I guess. It's necessary. A well-regulated militia is necessary. I wonder what he thinks about militias. Just out of curiosity. Probably doesn't like them, my guess.
Well, that's just what we now call the National Guard. That's from the quote that he says below.
And he would be wrong about that.
Waldman.
That's historic. That would be historically wrong.
Yeah. To be fair, he quotes Waldman on that. He doesn't necessarily say that, but he does, seem to present it as agreeing with Waldman. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know.
Of all the Second Amendment scholars out there, he picked that guy, and he picked that quote.
Exactly.
So
he's at least sympathetic.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people, not the right of the militia. It never says the militia has a right to keep and bear arms. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The right of the people, that phrase occurs in the First Amendment. The right of the people. And there it is clearly not the government, because it is, when you read the First Amendment, the right that the people have is opposed to the government.
And it wouldn't make sense.
It's a right of the people to peaceably assemble, to petition the government. It's not themselves. They don't have a right to petition themselves. The people is not the government.
That's right.
Okay, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, and it wouldn't make sense to try to locate that in the National Guard, because the National Guard is not the guard. It isn't about the people. It's about the nation. It's the National Guard, right? The National Guard isn't directed by the people.
I think he's talking about state militias, which means it's a right of the state, which is the government. My point is
Right.
the right of the people is not the government. It's not spelling out a right of the government.
Correct.
Nowhere in the Bill of Rights, besides the 10th Amendment, nowhere in these early Bill of Rights, 1 through 8, is there a right that is mentioned of the government. Now, you might be able to, put together what you think the government can do, but these are rights of the people, right? So, for example, the government is curbed. The government is limited by the First Amendment.
That's
The
right.
people are empowered. The government is limited by the Second Amendment. It's not empowered, it's limited. The right of the government in the Third Amendment is limited, and the right of the people to be secure in their houses, for example. And the Fourth Amendment uses the phrase, the people, the right of the people to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. There's a negative right.
That's right.
Is that absolute? Or is that, I mean, I don't even think is it absolute or conditional? I mean, who cares if it's absolute or conditional?
Right.
That doesn't even enter my mind. Do I have an absolute right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure? Well, what abilities? Remember, he said the conditional right would be conditional on abilities or some kind of property that I have or something. It's not conditional on me.
Yeah.
My right to have an attorney, which is a positive right now, I mean, given the Warren Court, it wasn't always the case. It was a negative right. I have a right to hire if I have the money, but I don't have the right to the government give me money until the Warren Court said, yes, you have a right for the government to give you money for a lawyer and we'll pay for it. Again, I don't think, is that an absolute right or a conditional right? I mean, this is not something I think about, but it's not, I don't think it's very helpful.
Right.
The language he used. But anyway, he says, I'm pointing out that he mentions Scalia's decision in Heller, and Scalia goes through this. He says, I'm quoting Scalia in Heller. I'm saying, he said what I'm saying. These are rights of the people. They're rights of people, not government.
There's a place in here where
people have a right
that place
for
where he
due
talks
process.
about
The government doesn't have a right to due process. I have a right to due process.
right. There's a place where he talks about that with Scalia, and I think is that same spot. He says that Scalia.
It's on page 9. It's on page 9.
Where Scalia apparently overturns 200 years of precedence.
It's in that quote you mentioned.
Okay, yeah, and that's not the case. Scalia didn't overturn any precedent. You had some good points about precedent.
Let's get that quote out there.
That I can't articulate as well as you.
Well,
because you've been in the weeds with the legal parts, Yeah, where's that quote?
The Waldman quote.
Oh, here's where he says that he ends that quote. It's the Waldman quote. That's right. The Supreme Court found there to be an individual right to gun ownership just a few years ago. And that's, man, I want to say it was...
Hold on a sec. That's, let me find where that is.
That's on page 9 at the end of
Oh, yeah, I got it. Yeah,
last
got it.
sentence of that quote.
Well,
And I wish
two observations to that with that. Two observations. One is it's not clear what the significance of that quote is.
right.
Because if there's lots of so-called progressive wet dream kind of progressive quotes that came out of the Warren Court that were just recently found. Like, for example, the right to not incriminate yourself. Now, I mean, of course, you always had a right not to be a witness against yourself, a federal right. But what the Warren Court did was they applied that right to the states, and they gave it a twist in Miranda versus Arizona. They said that you have a positive right now for an arresting officer to say certain words to you. You now have to have, it's called a Miranda warning,
Right.
based on that case. You now have a positive right for these words to come out of the mouth of the arresting officer.
Before you were
Not
arrested.
not just you don't have a right to not be a witness against yourself in court, but even in an interview, and you have a right to advance notice that
Yes.
this is a more strict interpretation, and that had never been applied to the states prior to that on a national level. But progressives, man, they wet their pants over that. They loved that.
Yeah.
Of course, it was during a major crime wave, and the guy in that case was a very bad man, and he got off. He got off because of the case. So a really bad man got off. So it's not clear. I mean, just the fact that even if it's true that the Supreme Court found just a few years ago this for the first time in history, there's lots of things like the Voting Rights Act being enforced by the courts. That would be the first time in history too. But I mean, that was supposedly enforcing the 15th Amendment, which prohibited discrimination by race in voting. The 15th Amendment was passed only by Republicans, maybe 95% Republican. It might have been one Democrat or two. Right after the Civil War in the 1860s, 1870 maybe, the latest. I think it was 1867. I want to say. Maybe 1868.
That's a good point too. One of the other thoughts that I had as far as laying out the history of guns in America and history of rights and all this stuff, it'd be really interesting to see what was the makeup of the Senate and the legislative branches when these bills passed. When the bills that
when you say bill, what do you mean by the bill?
When certain things passed, was it mostly Republicans that passed a certain kind of legislation? Or was it mostly Democrats that pushed through a certain kind of legislation?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's worth noting because it pushes it speaks to the, I guess, the values or the perspective that's being advanced.
Okay. That's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
And so let's stick to that Waldman quote. Let's stick to that Waldman quote, because that Waldman quote, let me get my light up here again.
Well, it kind of sums it up.
The Waldman quote, he says, for 218 years, judges overwhelmingly conclude, and by the way, this is a very short part of the Second Amendment, his section on the Second Amendment. He picks a book on the Second Amendment and quotes that guy and only that guy. He doesn't quote much else. The Bill of Rights was not such a first blah, 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 blah. Okay, For 218 years, judges overwhelmingly concluded the amendment authorized states to form militias. Well, first of all, why are we worried about what judges are thinking? I don't recall any state that had anxiety about whether it could have a militia. But maybe that's me. Militias predate the founding. They already existed. You know, everybody knew what that word meant. And I don't think that there was any anxiety about whether states the government had a right to have a militia. And I don't think anybody was holding their breath and saying, oh, thank God we have the Second Amendment now so that we can have a militia.
Right.
Take, for example, the state of California. If you look at the Military and Veterans Act, right now, you could look it up. It says there is the organized militia, which ever since 1905 and following after the Dix Act, which is what helped formalize the National Guard. It was after 1905. That the state organized militia is the state National Guard. But there's also the unorganized militia, which is any able-bodied male between 18 and 45. It's just not true that the state militia, even now, is the National Guard. That's not exactly right.
Yeah.
And it never has been. In fact, the 18 to 45 thing, that's the older one. That's actually what's older. It's still in law, and it predates the National Guard.
Right.
There's no anxiety. There was no anxiety about that at all.
States never
At the
worried
beginning
about
of no. When California was being formed in 1849, 1850, there was no anxiety about whether they could have militia, and there was nobody going, "Oh, thank God we have the Second Amendment." That's not what it was. But in any case, there might have been some judges that said that here and there, but it doesn't matter. Then in 2008, I'm continuing with that Waldman quote. The U.S. Supreme Court upended 2 centuries of precedent. That's not true. That's not true. The precedent that was overturned in Heller was only in the District of Columbia and federal territories. And that specific regulation at issue in Heller, which prevented Dick Heller, a retired police officer, from having a pistol in his home for self-defense. That's how radical these mother effers are. They don't even want policemen to go home and have self-defense with a firearm. That was decades old. It was not 2 centuries of precedent. That's just false. It is false that since the beginning of District of Columbia, police officers could not have a functioning firearm for self-defense in the home. That is false. That was a new thing that Democrats invented that was overturned in Heller. So that's false. In the case of District of Columbia versus Heller, an opinion written by Justice Antonin Scalia declared the Constitution confers a right to own a gun. Where's the subject? Who's the subject of the verb own? The right to own a gun. Well, who are you talking about? People. Not government has never wondered, do I have a right to own a gun? Where is that document? Where's George Washington wondering as he commands the army against Great Britain? Where's my right to own a gun? If only I had the Second Amendment giving me a right. The government never wonders where its right to own a gun is. It's people. It's people against the government. I mean, this is so basic. It's so basic. It's just embarrassing. That's right. And here's the gotcha. That's right. The Supreme Court found there to be an individual right to gun ownership a few years ago. But the Constitution creates the Supreme Court, not the other way around. The Supreme Court doesn't create the Constitution. No, The Constitution existed, and then the court did, because the Constitution created the Supreme Court. And the reason that it was a newer case is because it was uncontroversial up until recently, up until that point. It was uncontroversial that people could own a gun at home.
And that's
for
pretty
self-defense.
common. That some of these things, like people quibble over the wording of the Second Amendment. There were things that weren't put into the wording of the Second Amendment because they were commonly held beliefs, common sense. It's the way it was. It's like when we're talking about things that are common to us, we don't always clarify with great pain to make sure that people understand that when I'm talking about, I don't know. I mean, forgive me for the crude example, but we used to be able to, it used to be common sense that a man or a woman was identifiable by their parts. Well, apparently
by
now,
appearances.
right? Apparently
by
now we
their
can't do that.
But yeah, by their appearances. Actually,
that's been common
because it
sense.
It would be vulgar to expose your parts.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But now,
appearances.
I mean, you want to talk about overturning precedents. There's a precedent that's been around for thousands of years that's being overturned today. This is no different, just a different context. It's similar concepts.
Yeah, I don't know what he thinks about that. He might be on our side on that.
He probably is. Yeah, I'm not trying to say he's not. I'm just trying to give an example of just common sense isn't always common sense isn't always made overt. That's all.
Well, it's just a disappointing book. It's so disappointing. I mean, I appreciate what he's trying to do. He's got a Ph.D. in philosophy. I don't know. He's thinking, I got this. I'm sick of seeing what I'm seeing with gun violence. And it's not Christian, and this is more Christian, and I'm going to do the best I can. If this is the best he can, I don't know. I think it'd be better that the book wasn't written.
Well, you know what? It's a starting point.
Sure.
And he's right that there aren't a lot of these types of projects being done. And so I do applaud him for stepping out there and being one of the first, one of the few. We need more work. Clearly, I mean, for as much as I applaud him, the book also shows the point that we need more work done on this.
Yeah. But a book that serves the purpose of criminalizing innocent conduct in the name of Christianity needs to be exposed.
Absolutely.
For the evil it is. And so that's, I do like, I gave him a compliment in my written response of his chapter 3, I believe it was, which we're not going to get to today. But I said that I was disappointed, and I said, I don't know if your soul, Mike, is inured to the incredible harm when government overreaches and criminalizes innocent people. I don't know if you really are aware of that. Right. I'm not sure. I'm just not sure. But your book is definitely inured to that. The soul of the book is inured to that horror. And one of the things that bothered me so much was when he mentions these cases. There's two important cases, Heller versus DC and McDonald versus Chicago. There is not a single word about what harm the plaintiffs were experiencing in those cases. And that is just irresponsible. You're talking about Dick Heller, a police officer in DC, could not have a gun for self-defense in his own home. That was criminalized. That innocent conduct was criminalized. Not a peep out of Mike Austin. Not a freaking word. And I wanted to say the F word there, and I didn't. In McDonald versus Chicago, Otis McDonald, a black man, criminalized by the city of Chicago, run entirely by Democrats. These are entirely Democrat areas. Criminalized if he wanted to defend himself. In the record, it said that the police take 20 minutes if my life is threatened in a bad neighborhood. And the answer was, we don't care. You are to rely on the police for self-defense. You are to rely on the police for your personal bodyguards. And Mike Austin is just fine with that.
Hold out for 20 minutes.
He doesn't mention anything about the harm that the government was causing, Democratic Party, his party was causing, that the Supreme Court, five Republicans in each case, overturned. Thank God. By the way, paid for by the National Rifle Association in the case of Otis McDonald, and they got attorney's fees. Praise God. From the city of Chicago. The Democrats had to pay for the NRA's attorney's fees because they spent millions of dollars to prevent a black man from not having to rely on the racist police in Chicago for self-defense. That's how evil these people are.
Yeah.
And Mike, if you're listening, you have not let that sink in to your freaking soul, dude. And I'm mad because you wrote a damn book about it and you didn't even bother with that story at all. That should have been your first story. At least mix it in there. What about that harm? What about those harms? People harmed by criminalization of self-defense. Shame. It is a horror. It is a blight on our nation. We need to get more into this. We are gonna do it. Sorry, I felt like I had to preach there.
No, that's good stuff. You know, we need to be thinking about all the parties involved, all sides. It's not just a matter of some people getting to determine who gets what, whether that's rights or property. We need to be keeping this on. If you know, I really do think that Mike is making an effort to bring in the moral aspect of this, but it's not being addressed fully. It's being addressed from a particular perspective, and what it leaves out.
Well, he
like
can't. I don't fault him for having a perspective.
Of course not.
But he's not saved by bringing a moral perspective to this. He's not saved by that.
Right.
The people that defended slavery did so for moral reasons. The people that defended segregation did so for moral reasons. Look up McDonald versus Chicago, which he barely mentions. Look at the KKK references. They're all against him. I mean, they wanted criminalization of self-defense, just like he does. Mm-hmm. They were perfectly happy with black people relying on the police.
Well, that was their agenda. Yeah.
I mean, Dred Scott, in the language of Dred Scott, Roger Taney, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was a Democrat, by the way,
Well, and let's not even, I mean, not that we need to get into this now too, but there are
But
definitely racial aspects to
but,
the
but
some police
yeah,
departments being formed in the first place. Like you're saying with the
Chief
KKK.
Chief Justice Taney in Dred Scott said, he said in that opinion, Supreme Court decision, which affirmed that Dred Scott was still a slave. That was the, you know, he's still a slave because he's black. That's basically what it said. He's black, and so he can't be a citizen. He cannot be a citizen, therefore he can't bring the case. So I just summarized Dred Scott, 10 years of Dred Scott, which caused the Civil War and led to the formation of the Republican Party, the party which I'm involved with. Praise God. Praise God.
Yes.
You can't
Amen.
tell me that God was not a part of that. So in Dred Scott, Roger Taney said that they can't be citizens, blacks, because if they were citizens, they would have a right to be armed wherever they went. He says that.
And we can't have
Which,
that
which,
because we might have an
but,
insurrection.
put two and two together here. Put
Yes.
two and two together. Page 9, the quote I just mentioned about overturning precedent, individual right to keep and bear arms. The Waldman quote, page 9, bottom. Dred Scott was 1856, and he clearly says that the right to keep and bear arms is an individual right. And that was his evidence that Dred Scott couldn't be a citizen because otherwise he would be able to have a gun. That was his evidence. You might say, well, that was the Democratic Party then. No. Fast forward to 2009, 10. Otis McDonald, black, Democratic area, Chicago. Name me one Republican in Chicago. Name me one in the city council making these ordinances, restricting him, criminalizing him for defending himself against murder with a firearm. They spent millions of taxpayer money to prevent a black man from not relying on the police as a bodyguard. That's really what it was about.
Yeah.
He was regarded as a criminal to defend himself against murder, which is in the Ten Commandments. Is it different Democratic Party? No, it's the same. It's the same. And so that's why in that decision, they mentioned the Ku Klux Klan, which started right after that, 1865, under a Democratic president, who is from Tennessee, by the way. His name is Andrew Johnson. He succeeded Abraham Lincoln when Abraham Lincoln was shot by a Democrat.
Andrew Johnson? Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Johnson. Abraham Lincoln had a Democratic vice president. So much for bipartisanship. And I mentioned that Andrew Johnson was from Tennessee because that's where the Klan was founded.
Yeah.
For the purpose of restricting gun possession and uses of firearms for self-defense from newly freed slaves. And they were Democrats. The Supreme Court was nice. They were nice in Otis McDonald versus Chicago. They were nice. They didn't bother mentioning they were Democrats. They were nice. 5 Republicans, they didn't bother mentioning political parties. They were being nice. And the only black man on the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, who was raised in the Democratic South in Georgia, he was raised in the segregated South. The only black man, the highest ranking national officer of the federal government, he's talking about this. In this Second Amendment case about Otis McDonald, black man, in 2010, during Obama. And does Mike Austin have anything to say about that? Not a freaking word. In God, Guns in America. That is a shame.
Pretty major oversight.
That is a blight on his book. I mean, I could not believe it. I honestly couldn't believe it. And I know what Boulder is like. I know what that place is like. It's a dark place. It's a bad place.
Yeah.
Boulder. There's a lot of evil in Boulder. I can feel it every time I go there. That's where he went for his Ph.D. I don't know. I don't want to believe this, but I just, he went there after Talbot. And I'm just like, dude, I don't know how much Boulder rubbed off on you, dude. But you're not able to see these basic things. Anyway, listen to me. I'm talking too much. I'm sorry. I'm talking too much. I apologize. Is it cold there?
It is actually. It's getting down into the 40s.
You don't have a hat on. Are you freezing or?
Well, I'm not in the wind right now, so it's not terrible. We drove a few. I don't know. We drove about 6 hours north. We're up in
Did you say you drove Sig Sauer north?
We actually did drive 6 hour north, because on the way, Pamela picked up her concealed carry. She got herself a nice 365.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
God bless her.
We had to pick that up on the way.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, that's great.
But it was 6 hours, is what I said.
Yeah, I know you did.
Yeah, so 6 hours north. Apparently, we drove into snow. We weren't necessarily expecting it. So we're supposed to have snow tomorrow.
That's awesome. Well, let's go ahead and end here. Do you have anything else to say?
No, I think that's a good place to leave it. I think that's a good place to leave it. I'm looking forward to getting into the coming chapters as well and breaking down some of the arguments.
Okay, we'll do that. All right.
All right.
It's good seeing you, brother.
Good to see you. Good talking about
Have a
this
good
stuff.
trip.
Thanks, man.
Okay.
We'll talk soon.
See you.
Later.